All right, Tim, I know I'm going to start with the question everyone's asking. Are you more excited that a Tim is on the ticket or a Minnesotan?
It's both, honestly. It's a
Come
great day to
on,
be a
pick.
Minnesotan. Look, okay, I'll pick. I'm going to go selfless here and Minnesotan on the ticket. It is
Ah,
land of 10,000 VPs. We produce vice presidents in Minnesota,
Walter
so
Walter Mondale, man.
yeah. No, it is good. I think like speaking to a different audience here. I think that as people get to hear from Governor Walz, they're going to understand what it means to have a prairie populist agenda. People want to say progressive. I think it's populism. He did so much with a very slim majority in Minnesota. Obviously, the Trump campaign out with attacks this morning, but he has some great legs to stand on.
but let's just so do me a favor. Give me your 30-second Tim Waltz elevator pitch. Like why
Yeah,
if no one's met him, and I think by and large a lot of Democrats probably haven't met him either. What should they know about Tim Waltz?
yeah. Um, well, look, he enlisted in the Army National Guard. He's a veteran. He's a teacher. He was a high school teacher. He was a football coach. He won one of the reddest congressional districts in Minnesota when he was in Congress in 2006, a congressional district that has elected a Democrat, I think, twice since 1890. I think he is a very reasonable person who can talk to people in a very normal way. I do think part of the reason he was elevated during this Veep stakes is how he was able to talk about what JD Vance is saying about rural America in a way that resonates with people from rural America because he grew up in a town of 400 in Nebraska, which is the golden rule there is mind your own damn business. So there's a lot of Democratic agenda that I think flows through that type of framing, which is don't tell women what to do with their bodies. Stay out of our exam rooms. Don't ban books. And he also has passed an agenda in Minnesota that I think, whether it's paid family leave, whether it is expanding school meals for kids for free lunch so they're not hungry when they're trying to learn. There's just so much credibility for him to stand on. And to your point, look, yeah, the nation does have to get to know him. He had an amazing trajectory over the last 2.5 weeks. But I'm excited to see the nation get to know him.
All right, so the Republican side, the Trump team, the RNC, Republican conservative influencers, it's funny. Like I was watching the reaction to Waltz, and everybody was very clear, right? That he's this far left progressive, defund the police, gender affirming care. And two things came to mind. The first thing is that like he's far left, right? And the second one is I felt like our side had a easier time defining him out of the gate than it did Kamala.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think what I've seen from the Trump campaign so far is just kind of a reiteration of everything they're trying to say about Kamala. I mean, out of the gate, they called him like a West Coast wannabe, which to me, from Minnesota, is hilarious, right? Like this is a guy who spends his time pheasant hunting, who is a rural Minnesota guy. Again, understands how to talk to people. Grew up on a farm. I think part of the Trump framing was like he's insulting rural voters by saying like it's mostly cows out there. I mean, like he said that because like that's where he lived, that's where he grew up. That sensibility and that mindset is what has guided him through his career. So I think what's interesting to me is like I don't know that I've really seen anything new in the Trump approach. And like as we've talked about, if the first consideration for VP is like do no harm. I don't see anything new. I see them using the California liberal San Francisco attack, but I just don't think it passes muster with Walz.
But
We'll
but
see.
but I would have juxtaposed that. Like I've said this. You and I do this morning meeting every morning with Mark Halpern at 9 a.m. I hope everyone tunes into that to hear more of the political back and forth about what's going to happen in the next 24 hours. As a Republican who wants Trump to win, I was very concerned about Shapiro because of the 19 electoral votes that I don't think it was a guarantee, but I
Yeah.
think he could have made a very strong play. And while I'm not a big fan of vice presidents and what they do on tickets, I do think that Shapiro could have brought a lot more to the ticket. Why am I wrong?
Yeah. I mean, questions there about home state effects, right? And I have nothing bad to say about Governor Shapiro. I think he's phenomenal. I think, he has built a bipartisan coalition in Pennsylvania as well. I think Chris Christie on ABC was one who noted, he ran against Doug Mastriano the last gubernatorial election, which did allow him to build a bigger coalition. But like, it is always kind of a question of like home state effects, right? Like, are those real? Will those
Right.
materialize?
Right.
Questionable. But Tim Walz is also someone who, coming from Minnesota with his populist background from rural America, you can park him in those blue wall states too, and he'll be a phenomenal messenger. And again, I will just underscore. I think during this audition process over the last 2.5 weeks, where he really was shining was taking on JD Vance and a juxtaposition of JD Vance, hillbilly elegy, comes from rural America. So does Tim Walz. And I think there's a strong value there for the Harris ticket, too. And I think that's part of what they saw.
Yeah. The other question is, do you think, I mean, like one of the narratives coming out of Shapiro world, obviously there's a lot of people who are trying to talk about anti-Semitism, but then there's also questions about Josh Shapiro's ambition, and that, do you really want that as a partner? Do you want somebody who's constantly trying to show you up? And I understand that if you're the presidential nominee, you don't want a VP who's sniping at your hit, kind of biting at your ankles, trying to figure out what their play is. How much do you think that went into to factor for her? Because
Yeah.
Waltz doesn't seem like a guy that's going to outshine her.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know, right? Like that is, I will just say, I think there is part of this vetting process, which again, we did in a very condensed time period, right? The shortest sweepstakes we've ever really had, where one of those final meetings is you go and you sit with the top of the ticket and you have a conversation about how your agendas align, how your values align. I think for Walz, it mostly is that like, he stands on his own. And I think there is a question there. And I'm not saying in any way like Shapiro failed this test, but I can absolutely understand how in that meeting with Harris, having a discussion and saying, can I have lunch with this person for the next 4 years? And are we aligned on values and agenda? And I think the answer with Walz is a resounding yes. I can't speak to anything about Shapiro, whether it's yes or no there too. Obviously he was a finalist in this conversation as well. But I really just do think, and again, he has a lower profile, but it has exploded. It's Tim Walz's trajectory through this process that has gotten him here.
So politically speaking, when this choice came out, a lot of people on my side breathed a collective sigh of relief. Oh, thank goodness it wasn't Shapiro. Okay. Right or wrong, to your point about home state, like would he have carried Pennsylvania? We don't know, right? I think there's some serious questions about that. I believe that he would have made it much more difficult. Okay. That being said, what does it say that people like me and the Trump team sort of breathed a collective sigh of relief and said, thank God it's Waltz? Are we misunderestimating this guy? Don't we know him well enough? But I mean, the stuff that I see already in the first several hours is gender affirming care, support for Black Lives Matter, failure to address some of the stuff. There's even attacks on his military service coming from some of his former Army National Guard's fellow soldiers.
Yeah. I mean, I think what I will say to the sigh of relief is you all have an excellent poker face. And that is what you all are doing. But look, whoever got picked,
but here's what I would say. Like, if Shapiro had been the pick, honest to God, if this morning it had said Harris chooses Shapiro, I'm not sure what my initial reaction would have been. Like, honest to God, if you called me and said, it was a mistake, it's Shapiro, I would have gone, all right, I got to think about this. I honestly... Yeah. It was reflexive when it was Waltz. Thank God this guy so far to the left, she cements the vision of, progressive. And I get your point. But it made the attack easy. It was, we're not faking it. We're not going, okay, we got to paint him as some leftist.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I think that, like, again, either way, whoever gets picked, right? There's a statement that's ready. There's oppo that's ready. That's going to go out. I think the attempt to paint, again, Tim Walz as a leftist who I think passed a populist agenda in Minnesota, who's from rural Minnesota, who represented a rural Minnesota district, who sat on the Veterans Affairs Committee, did a lot for veterans benefits. as a congressman. There are attacks on any candidate. I don't think it's really going to stick, and I also think it is personality wise. If you listen to him speak, if you watch how he talks about rural America and his upbringing, I think there is, to your point too about the map, he expands the Harris ticket's ability to communicate with those voters. So, like, is there potentially a home state effect in Pennsylvania with Josh Shapiro? Sure, absolutely. Are there weaknesses to both candidates? Sure, absolutely. But I do think this bet is not what conservatives want to paint as, like, oh my gosh, we're doubling down to the left. Now, I understand that is the frame, that is what's going to be pushed. I don't think anything getting Waltz on the ticket, the issues change or the nature of how Republicans are going to communicate that message changes. I just think Democrats have added an incredibly effective communicator and a very good attack dog to the ticket who speaks to people in rural America. And I think that's expansive for Democrats. I think that's big.
So one of the big hits against J.D. Vance was, he doubled down on Trump, right? And frankly, I don't know that that's that harsh of an attack. I maintain Trump wanted somebody who bought into the agenda, didn't believe that he, quote, needed anything. Isn't the same now true of her? She doubled down on her policies. I mean, Waltz is not a moderate, right? You can say what you will, but it's not like she's pivoting to the center or trying to ameliorate some concerns here. This is, at best, a double down, if not going to further to the left.
Yeah. I mean, I guess as people get to know more about him, I mean, we will also see a little bit more about his congressional record when he represented a deep red district. I mean, in Minnesota, we are the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, not just the Democratic Party, and it is reflective of the agenda. So I fundamentally disagree with the idea that this is a drastic shift to the left. Again, I know that Republicans are going to push that. He's done things that are populist in Minnesota that are reflective of a broader agenda, capping insulin at $35, paid family and sick leave for when people get sick to be able to take care of your relatives. Those are popular things, right? Those are not leftist things. And I think he's actually very good at framing that question. The conversation we're having right now, right? He is very good at framing that question because during this process, when he was doing interviews on cable, he got those questions. And his reaction to go watch the Jake Tapper interview that he did last weekend.
Of all her potential running mates, you might have the most progressive record as governor. I know you were more of a moderate when you were in the House, but you've legalized recreational marijuana, you passed universal background checks on guns, you expanded LGBTQ protections, you implemented tuition-free college for low-income Minnesotans. There's free breakfast and lunch for school kids. Do you think your record is an asset to the ticket, or would it risk fueling Trump's attacks as you being a big government liberal?
What a monster. Kids are eating and having full bellies so they can go learn, and women are making their own healthcare decisions. And we're a top 5 business state, and we also rank in the top 3 of happiness. Look, they're going to label whatever they're going to label. He's going to roll it out, mispronounce names, to try and make the case. The fact of the matter is, where you see the policies that Vice President Harris was a part of making, Democratic governors across the country executed those policies, and quality of life is higher, the economies are better, all of those things. Educational attainment is better.
The question that he got about this agenda and saying, like, isn't that leftist? His answer is to bring it back to the center and explain that, no, these are just things that people desire, that are popular, that kids need full bellies in order to go to school and learn. So I think it's also about the messenger and how he discusses it. And I think he's a great messenger for it.
So if you had to say, let's just, for discussion purposes, Kamala Harris is dead center. Is he with her? Is he to the right of her, or is he to the left of her?
I think he's in the middle. I really do think Governor Waltz is a moderate pick. I know Republicans are going to try to paint it otherwise. I know people who are listening to this are probably bought into something that he's further to the right, but I will just say, listen to him. Listen to how he talks. He is a guy who, before Election Day in 2022, posts a video about fixing the spark plug in his car. People joking about, like, he could be the next vice president. He could also be someone who's going to go, like, clean his garage this weekend and tune up the lawnmower. That is the vibe that he gives off. And I really, that persona will come through.
One issue that always, well, not always, but has recently concerned me on our side is how our party has addressed the abortion issue. Frankly, I don't think it's tough enough. I think our side is weak when it comes to doing it. And the left, to their credit, has capitalized on this. That being said, do you think his position on gender affirming care is could be a liability to him in some of these rural areas, Arizona, Georgia, even in Michigan and Pennsylvania, that suddenly might negate some of this when it comes to the position of women?
Yeah. I mean, my immediate take there is no, I don't think so. And I will just on the abortion question, which I has like which to your point, I think has very strong resonance. There's also good contrast bringing him on the ticket with that. One, codifying abortion protections in Minnesota, extremely important, shows a pathway forward there. I think also two, talking about his personal story and his family's journey with IVF, in particular, putting him on stage with JD Vance with the comments that we have heard about childless cat ladies, I think is a really, really strong contrast. It's a message that he drove over the last couple of weeks. And I think that is going to be the focus of the debate.
Let me ask you more of an existential question. You know where I stand on this. I know you and I love talking about this because we're political operatives. I know the audience who watches the show loves to hear about it because this is what they care about. But at the end of the day, does the VP pick matter, do you think? Or is this just something that you and I and a lot of political junkies love talking about?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think there are some ways in which it does matter, right? First, is it a pick that well reflects the judgment of the candidate at the top of the ticket? I do think in this campaign, right, voters are going to make their decision Harris v. Walz. But I do think, for example, with like a JD Vance, if you have like historic unpopularity, if you are saying things that are out of alignment with the top of the ticket, that are highly problematic, then it can be a problem. I think the VP pick also sometimes is someone who bolsters geographically or in battleground states or message-wise or with experience. And I think Walz brings, again, some of that to the ticket. We're going to see how this plays out. We'll see what sticks from the Trump campaign. We'll see what the pushback is and the flexibility of the Harris team and the Walz team to respond. I think VP picks in elections that are exceedingly close can matter. I don't think you can say it doesn't or couldn't whatsoever. We know when we're having elections that are decided by tens of thousands of votes in battleground states.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think that I've always believed that it reinforces. Like, so there are times when someone can say, maybe I wasn't sure if I was going to vote for Trump, but I like JD Vance, and so therefore it's going to make it, more palatable to me. Or I think that this candidate was tough. So it reaffirms a position sometimes. So Mike Pence helped Trump with the evangelical community. I don't know that they wouldn't have voted for him, but they definitely wouldn't have been as enthusiastic. Anyway, you keep bringing up this debate that's going to happen between JD Vance and Tim Walz. That debate, by the way, was scheduled, so theoretically, by CBS on August 12th. Just logistically,
yeah.
Do you think that like that debate still holds, or do we have to do a renegotiation of that debate?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think there's probably some renegotiation period just based on timeline and logistics here. I don't think anyone's going to shy away from the debate. But we'll see in terms of timing. Look, do it August 12th, right? I'm not in the Harris campaign. I think Tim Walz has shown it. He can take it to JD Vance immediately already, but we're talking a few days from now. So I think there's some logistics, some renegotiation there.
Yeah, I will say this. I think he's done some good interviews. I'll give you that. But being able to understand and articulate your vulnerabilities where it comes to your position versus, say, the top of the ticket, he needs to iron those out. So it's one thing to say them as a free agent, as the governor of Minnesota, saying, hey, look, blah, 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 blah. It's another thing now when you're tied at the hip. And I would just say, my point is, I think that they might want some more time to say, hey, you know how I said this? We need to nuance that a little bit more. I think you saw that a little with JD in some of the positions that he had. But let's go back to the writ large, this debate on debates. They're trying to make the case that Trump pulled out of the September debate with ABC. Well, if he pulled out of that debate, which was with Biden, then I would argue that Kamala is pulling out of the debate on August 12th on CBS. The logic is the same. Do we need to, how does this resolve itself in your mind? I mean, I get everyone's going to point fingers. Trump accepted a Fox debate. Kamala says, I'm going to go to the ABC debate that Biden was supposed to go to. There's still, we can point fingers, but I mean, my question to you more as an operative is, how do you think this ultimately shakes out? Do they just continue to point fingers, or is it all right, guys, we both want to do this. Let's sit down and find something new.
Yeah, I think there are incentives for both sides to do this, right? I do think the Harris campaign has a strong point that, like, we have a debate on the books. We should do that debate, and can press a point against Trump where he said, look, anytime, anywhere. And now that's changed a little bit. He's retreated a little bit to the Fox debate, although I really haven't heard any further logistics about the Fox debate. I mean, he's mentioned it, but it seems very up in the air. I think we're going to go through a short period here where there will be a debate on debates. I think ultimately, and you know better than anybody, but it seems like personally, probably Donald Trump cannot resist the ability to want to get on a debate stage. I do take to heart, though, Harris's point that, like, you want to say something, say it to my face. Why are you calling off this one debate? But I think we're going to have a little period here where, yes, there's going to be a reorganization on both sides and how they approach the debates.
Yeah, I think there has to be a middle ground because, again, I think no one, for the most part, the back and forths, no one's voting on that, right? I mean, like, no one's going, God, I was going to support Trump, but he isn't going to the ABC debate on September 10th. And I really was going to support Harris, but I think they either need to agree to do this. And my guess is that they do. And I think that there are, at least from my conversations, some networks and people behind the scenes trying to take advantage of this chaos. But I do ultimately think that. The last thing I want to ask you, though, goes to this point. A lot of folks on the right are making the case that Harris has not done an interview, been unscripted. I get why that makes sense. I mean, why would you, right? But do you think, from her standpoint, it makes sense to go out and do something to alleviate these concerns, or do you just stick to your guns and say, hey, it's working for us now, let's coast into the DNC on August 19th?
It's a good question. I mean, look, I think looking at the polls, looking at the money, looking at the momentum, there's a great Frank Luntz focus group from over the weekend that I watched, and it's just like a potpourri of undecided voters explaining why they are shifting to Harris. She'll do an interview. She'll sit down. She will do an interview. To your point, the calendar right now, we had Veep States, surprise Veep Stakes speculation for a couple of weeks. There's a lot of momentum generated behind that. We are walking into the DNC, our party's infomercial to America. There's a lot of momentum behind that. She will sit down and do interviews. But the way and the trajectory of the campaign in all of those facets, I understand why they haven't yet. But I don't think, like, it's not an off the table thing. It's not an if thing. It's a when thing. Okay. And I get their planning, and I think their planning makes a lot of sense to me. All
right. Well, I hope it's sooner rather than later for my purposes. Tim Hogan, I will see you again tomorrow morning at 9 on the morning meeting with Mark Halperin. Thanks for joining us today.